Today we're going to talk about the diagnostic process, which is really one of the underlying ideas to our course and something that we're going to see in more detail starting in the second unit. Let's talk a little bit about why we do assessment. And we do it for a lot of different reasons. We want to understand the individual, we want to predict, we want to understand etiology or the causes of the behavior. We may be doing it in order to predict prognosis, whether someone's going to do well or not so well, to plan treatment, or to evaluate the outcome of treatment. And we do this in a variety of different settings. So we do this in the schools to decide what kind of intellectual help or academic help this child needs. We do it to determine whether someone is insane, from a criminal point of view. We do it, I work some with the wraparound agencies in Clarion County, and we do it in order to determine whether someone is eligible for services. So lots of different reasons, but we start with a question. What is happening here? Does this child have attentional problems? And go forward. So, usually what happens is someone comes to me, and there are a whole series of questions going around. Is this child running into problems with school because of intellectual issues? Is this child running into problems because he's unable to concentrate because of stuff going on at home? Are there emotional problems that are interfering? And so we're trying to gather a bunch of different data, from a variety of different kinds of settings, and we'll talk more about those in the next video, and sort of, pull those apart. Not always as easy as it sounds, though. As you can see in this Boondocks cartoon, Huey is describing a variety of different kinds of symptoms: fatigue, aches, general feeling of unpleasantness, and it could be a cold or indigestion, depression, cancer, as he's, catastrophizing. But any of those could explain what's going on. And in order to do what we're doing well, we need to know something about developmental norms. So I hope that many of you have already taken developmental psych. But so if we were here looking at Jeremy and his friend Hector, we should be asking whether, this problem with staying on task is normal for 15-year-olds. And you may be thinking about that yourself. Is that normal or not? And that's part of my job as a psychologist, to bring that to the table. Now, in order to do what I do well, I want to be using tests that are both reliable and valid. And I love the idea of a scale because, if I'm getting on a scale and it always says the same number. So if regardless, I got on and it said I was 75 pounds, got off, got back on, 75 pounds, got off, got back on, 75 pounds, it would be reliable, it would be consistent. And yet, that's probably not good data, because I haven't seen 75 pounds since I was probably 9 years old. And your job, when you're looking for an assessment, is to think about, is it reliable? Is it valid? Okay? And so, I want something that is going to be a better predictor of what is actually happening. So there are advantages and disadvantages to diagnosis, and we've begun thinking about these. Some of the advantages of diagnosis and assessment process is that it helps us to sort of see some standardization to what's going on. And I'm able to, when I'm diagnosing someone with depression, for example, I know that what I'm saying matches my colleagues when they're also diagnosing someone with depression. So that standardization, that ability to look at the research and to say, all of these people sort of know what depression is. Those are real advantages. We can even say, does this, where is someone falling on this normal curve? Are they above average, below average? And so all of these things that psychologists do that probably drive students crazy sometimes are really useful in terms of making our work more meaningful, more valid. The downside. As we attach diagnoses, we're also attaching labels to the person. And that means that sometimes people walk out of a situation and say, this is all I'm able to do because, I am depressed, I have panic, I have a learning disability, I have whatever. And they may label themselves, or other people may label them. That they may say, oh, that's my crazy Aunt Susie, rather than stopping and seeing the person for who they are. So what I would encourage you to do is be somewhat cautious in your use of labels and diagnoses. Part of what I want you to be thinking about is, who is this person? So I've asked you to read an article on person-first thinking. And I think it's very easy for us to just see the label and forget the whole range of things that a person brings to a situation. Kay Redfield Jameson here talks some about those issues. She is diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She also is one of the leading researchers on mood disorders and suicide. And it's very easy to look at one or the other side. And if you're going to do this work and do it well, I think you need to be able to do both. To be able to see the richness of the person. To see someone as a parent, as a child, as a writer, as someone who's creative or empathic, and to see that person not as a disease, but as a person with a disorder. And that's a fairly subtle distinction, but one that I'd like you to begin playing with. As you do that, you're going to find that you are able to generate more empathy for the people that you're working with, and that they're going to be able to hear you as more empathic. Now the DSM is, and the DSM-5 is something that we're going to be working with all semester. And the diagnoses are drawn from there. You notice that Carney and Trull take a dimensional view of psychiatric disorders. And that is somewhat different than the DSM takes. The DSM talks about or takes a more categorical viewpoint. You're either diagnosed with bipolar disorder, dysthymia, major depressive disorder, whatever. Now, the DSM-5 takes a somewhat more dimensional viewpoint than previous versions. You know, that it looks at severity of issues. As we're talking about autism, we'll talk about the severity of the interferences, but it's still tending to be much more categorical in orientation, which is, I think, one of its weaknesses. So, what should you do now? Given today's discussion, what do you see as some of the advantages and disadvantages of diagnoses? And you'll see, other kinds of advantages and disadvantages in Carney and Trull. Think about how you can maximize those advantages or minimize the disadvantages. And over the next week, notice how people use or fail to use person first language. And consider how you feel when that happens. We're going to talk next about assessment. Take care.